Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we're looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network.
And I'm Pete Wright, and it's the day you've all been waiting for. It's Blue Beam Day!
Here it is. Today we are talking about minute 103, which begins with Tony incinerating a few pedestrians and ends with Tony incinerating a few Chitauri. Back on the show, we have film critic Ewan Graf.
I have to call that out. You can do the introduction later, but that's the worst thing you've ever said. Okay, you may continue. You're the worst. That was disgusting.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. We'll litigate that later. I'm just saying, have a little decorum, man.
Hey, I just say it like I see it. Oh, that's right. We have film critic Ewan Graf from the Quiet on Set podcast joining us again. Hello, Ewan.
Hey, guys. I actually agree with you, Andy. That was my first point as well. Those people are not alive.
They are not alive.
They're grilled.
I mean, what?
At least, for crying out loud, at least somebody turns to jelly in this minute.
Right. Yeah, following up on yesterday's comments. It's a funny, first of all, aside from getting incinerated, which definitely I want to talk about, but the idea of where Tony falls, like his, the top of his building, it's kind of, it's tucked in from the sidewalk. It's not directly over the sidewalk. So the fact that he falls and kind of, instead of dropping directly down, somehow he keeps kind of moving farther and farther away from the building as he falls to the point where he's over the sidewalk. It's kind of funky. Like if you see the shot of his POV as he gets the mask on, he's coming directly down on top of like that group of 4. And then it cuts to his handbrakes and you see that, okay, he's coming below the tower. It cuts to the very next shot. And that is like, oh, hold on. He was actually way back over the top of the building that they're next to. Like he shouldn't even be over these people. It's constructed in a way where I think that the filmmakers are really just trying to get away with it in a way to just put these people's lives in danger.
Yeah, but we don't get to see like flesh flaying off of their skulls.
No.
So
unfortunately
there's
not.
some tape. Unfortunately not. Okay. Who is here to play?
Bring the flesh flame.
I mean, I'd love to see it take from, what's it called? The YouTube channel, Corridor Digital. They sometimes do the R-rated version of this and just do this scene.
Oh, right.
I think that's, but I think it wants to focus on that, just close-up shot of Tony and then showing his point of view. And then it just doesn't match probably what they shot here with the plate that they use shooting up, at the Stark Tower. And probably just a slight mismatch there with, something in the direction. But, I mean, just more people to grill at the end of the day, so.
Well, plus, let's also remember that it's not just Tony falling. There are thousands of shards of glass also falling with him.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to think happens is as he hits his thrusters, his palm thrusters, and like blasts down toward these people, that basically he melts that glass. And
it's a breeze of sand that comes down on them.
Yeah, it's just like, but it penetrates their bodies. Like I think these people are just riddled with tiny holes from all the melted
shards of glass.
Flaming hot glass.
Yeah. That's the origin of the Sandman in the MCU.
Terrible, just terrible stuff.
Sand people. Yeah,
sand people.
God. All right. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an interesting way to kind of kick things off. And, I suppose in the scope of things, Tony's energy from his thrusters is supposed to be completely neutral. It's supposed to be cool. It's not actually hot and all this stuff. But, I mean, even if that's the case, like there is so much dust and smoke and particles that he kicks up that, I mean, at the very least, these people have some serious pieces of things stuck in their eyes now.
Yeah, right at second 5, you have him do his flip where his feet take over the thrust, and somebody is legit blown out of frame by those. Right. Like there is trauma, head trauma at a minimum from that shot.
I mean, there's even dust on the lens at that point.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah, interesting breaking of the fourth wall here. Let's put some dirt on the lens through this.
And further convince everybody that damage done in real life is damage or done in the movie is damage done in real life. Like, of course, that person is thrown to the ground and their skull is cracked open. This is the worst minute of the whole. This is a horror minute.
What's worse, this minute or the minute in Captain America where the Hydra soldier gets dropped through the propeller of the drop ship?
I think that minute because of red mist. We don't actually get red mist in this minute.
Oh, opportunity missed.
But I will say, I do love what we get to see of the suit, like some of the articulation of the suit and the way the flaps on the back start to open up. Like, that's really cool. And it pays off seconds later in this very same minute when he's flying up and you see there are new thrusters on his back, which I think are just really cool. There's some really cool design touches to this stuff.
Well, and just even the reveal. I mean, it is kind of a fun reveal because we're seeing the Mark VII fitting itself to his body, and we're kind of getting the whole thing. As the helmet kind of pieces itself on and comes over his head, though, we cut to that great POV as we see the mask drop in, we see the eye slits, and then the HUD starts up, and it tracks everything that's going on below him before we cut to him. And it's in the scope of finding a unique way to kind of give us the new suit, I actually really like that we cut to the mask and the POV at that particular minute.
I was actually wondering, because we do get that like slide over and it's just those two little eye slits that he sees through. Is it like for a short little bit he doesn't see anything? And then once the visor is down, there's actually like something else that he manages to see a bit of a more wider range. Because like from his POV, he technically is not really seeing anything through those two eye slits that he just got to watch through.
Yeah, until
the HUD starts up.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting thing. Like the real problem if the tech starts we get this very briefly in the very first Iron Man when he's trying to see how high he can go and the whole thing freezes up and he falls back and it takes a minute to kind of get things back online and he really can't see anything because the HUD's completely shut down. Like this is exactly that moment. Like there's just that brief second where you get a sense of what you actually get if the HUD doesn't boot up. And it's like, nope, you're really not going to be able to see much out of this thing. It's not designed for that. It actually makes it all the more scary.
Yeah.
I mean, just from a logic standpoint, if something is like right next to your eye, you're probably not really seeing anything through it unless the thing you're looking at right in front of you is displaying it overall. But it wouldn't make sense for his eyes to light up then.
No. I always struggle with the fact that there's, I don't know, an inch maybe between his eye and the actual inside of the mask itself. And then to think that the HUD somehow projects so much information that he's able to actually see and register and focus on always kind of, makes me scratch my head a little bit. But it's one of those things that you just kind of roll with in the movie and go, okay, you know what? It's fine. It's fine. All right. So then we have Tony fly back up to the top of the tower. And two things. Loki is there and he's watching because we cut to Loki looking down and then he looks up to where Tony is. My first issue that I have here is, we have Tony speaking off camera and Loki look up like Tony just got there. And then we cut and Tony's not there yet. And then flies up. So it does make me, it's just like the lining up of those two shots. I'm like, yeah, doesn't quite work, but it's all right.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm going back and forth, and this would be a funny GIF. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like a weird yo-yo.
Yeah, like Tony's just not quite there yet.
What are you looking at, Loki?
Maybe he's just looking at the actual, extra Avenger, the Empire State Building there in the background.
Or the Chrysler Building, yeah.
The Chrysler Building? Oh, no, I'm it's so prominently featured. I thought it was a representative for the spirit of New York, but I messed it up with the names there. But
oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. I think that it's fair to say the Chrysler Building is probably as prominent and recognizable for New York as the Empire State Building.
I would support that.
Yeah. The next note, though, that I have is this is where Tony flies up and he delivers this line which always makes me chuckle a little bit. He says, and there's one other person you pissed off. His name is Phil. And I always go to Fight Club, and I just want him to say his name was Robert Paulson. I just want that so bad in this moment, because I just, it's just like, it feels so much like he's meant to say that right here.
When he's watching it, do you like mouth those words when you're watching this movie? His name is Robert Paulson.
Yeah, I totally do. Every time. I say that every time. It's one of those things, like it comes up and I was like, his name was Robert Paulson. Yeah.
That's weird. That's weird.
I mean, am I the only one? Is that something that either of you ever thought of at this moment? Or
not until just now. And possibly never again.
I thought that Loki's reaction would be like, who? And that's the extent of like my comedic sense. Like, oh yeah, that would be kind of funny.
That would be funny.
Oh, is that his name?
That's a really great point. Like, his name is Phil. Why did I piss off Phil? Was he?
And who is Phil again?
Right. I didn't pay for a hot dog. Was that Phil? Like, there's totally, there's room for that.
Yeah, he could run down like the guy with the eye, the guy with the
yeah. Was he the guy in No, not him. Who else? Yeah.
Who is Phil?
Phil?
Which is funny, because you think about that, like, would Clint have even told him? It's assuming that Clint gave him all the information on everybody at S.H.I.E.L.D., including Agent Coulson. Would he have called him Phil, or would he have said, yeah, and then there's Agent Coulson, blah, blah, blah? Like, why is Phil the name? Like, it's honestly, it really becomes Phil just because of the Phil joke that we have kind of starting at the beginning of this film, where Tony is now jealous that Pepper is calling him Phil. And ever since then, that's all he can think of is like, I want to be Phil's best friend too.
But actually, you just made it okay for me, right? That I thought it was weird, and then you justified it, and now it's totally justified. That I think it's okay that this is the first time he's using Phil in not a suspicious way. Right. And also using Phil for a guy like Tony, who's not part of the military industrial establishment. It feels totally right for him to be saying Phil instead of Agent Coulson. Right. There's a sense of familiarity that he's there for. So all of a sudden, this became my favorite minute, unironically, and I owe it to you.
You're welcome, I guess. But then if he said his name was Agent Coulson, then it would feel so much more like Robert Paulson. I almost would love that all the more. His name was Agent Coulson. And then you would have the whole group. It would cut to all the team on the helicarrier, and they would all be saying in unison, his name was Agent Coulson.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I don't understand what you're going for. I'm not saying I don't get it. I'm saying get the joke. I'm saying it's not a great one.
Yeah. I'll accept that. I'll
workshop
accept that.
it. We need to workshop it.
Okay. Well, Tony blasts Loki here. We know that his blasters can hit and hurt Loki. We saw it in Stuttgart as he knocked Loki back there. And same thing here. He kind of blasts him back, and Loki takes it in the chest and goes flying back, dropping the scepter. And we'll come back to him in a bit. But
well, wait a minute. I just have to say something here, because this is his second 13 when he raises his arm and blasts Loki back. How far do you think they are between each other, Loki and Iron Man, at this point?
20 feet.
How far do you think Tony was when he did his flip at the bottom of the building over the pedestrians?
That's a different type of... That's not propellant. This is a blast. He's shifted to weapons mode.
Oh, right. He's in... You're right. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that's the part.
The other one was just glowy orange. Here we get sparks.
Yes.
It's clearly different. Obviously.
It is clearly weapons mode. Okay.
Why does it spark when it hits Loki? That is funny. Like, is it... yeah, it's like a little sparkler goes off on his chest. I wonder if it's just igniting. I mean, it even ignites out of his hand. Like, this is... is this a Mark VII thing? Did the other ones sparkle as much as these? Maybe he's in sparkle mode now.
Oh, sparkle mode. Andy. Jarvis, go sparkle mode. Yes, I can hear it. I'm sure that's something he said.
I'm sure.
There is something combustible about Loki. And the question is from a continuity perspective, because at 14, we do see remnants of sparkle mode on Loki's fine Asgardian leather goods. And I wonder if, I've never looked before, but I wonder if we can see the remains of sparkle mode throughout the rest of the movie.
Something tells me we can't. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say they're probably not saying that it actually singed his suit. And actually, he's going to change clothes here soon anyway.
Yeah, that's right. He's going to change clothes.
He'll fancy himself up with his magic, get his helmet back, and all that good stuff.
And that probably erases any remnant of sparkle mode.
No, magic definitely does.
Yeah, it's Command C, just doing back whatever damage was done.
Command C, right? That's right. Right.
All right, blue beam. So Selvig's Tesseract machine up on the roof finally starts working, spins itself up, and pow! The tropey blue beam shoots up into the sky, and we start seeing something that looks a lot like our show art this season, Pete. It's the little hole opening up in the sky, and Tony, of course, sees it as well. And the Chitauri do too. My first question here, aside from the fact that I actually really like that shot in the dark, and you just see kind of like, I don't know what the purple glowy things on the Chitauri are, but it's cool as they reveal the Chitauri and then they take off. But what have the Chitauri been doing all this time? Like, what is there like a craft service table that they go have snacks at while they're waiting? Are they smokers? Do they like take smoke breaks? Or have they been sitting on their chariots all this time, just waiting for this hole to flip and open up?
In the middle of space.
Yeah, they're right, exactly.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I'm equipped to litigate this. I think they are just hanging out in space, waiting for the blue beam to open up on their side.
I mean, they're essentially drones, right? At the end of the day, so
yeah,
I don't know how much of a smoke break they need in between, just like waiting.
They don't apparently care. I guess the Chitauri, according to the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki, the Chitauri are a sentient species of cybernetically enhanced beings operating under a hive mind intelligence.
So an e-cigarette then.
The e-cigarettes. Right.
Vapes.
Yeah.
Oh
I
gosh,
did not know
perfect.
any of that. Do you think that makes it? Do you think that helps your understanding of this version of the Chitauri and what they're capable of doing, knowing that they're e-cigarettes?
I mean, they get smoked.
Yeah, so. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder because the Chitauri has been it's been a long and winding road getting the Chitauri from screen to this, or from the pages of the books, which aren't this Chitauri, to this version of the Chitauri, the mindless drone army. And I don't know that I needed much more to help me understand what they're capable of, but it is a question that always comes up when I watch this movie. So they can just be in space then, and then also fly around in the gravity of Earth without any change in anything. That's all.
This is, again, the fantasy side of the story where suddenly we really leave a lot of the reality behind. I mean, remember, we've already had the other and apparently Thanos hanging out on an asteroid again in the middle of space. Not to mention Asgard, which, kind of seems to be floating there, especially when they walk out to the end of the Rainbow Bridge out to Heimdall's observatory. It's like
Asgard, they've got just rivers that go into waterfalls that go nowhere, right? Like those waterfalls go into space. It is
right.
Asgard is the least environmentally conscious place in the MCU. They just waste water all the time.
Is it a waste though if they're just sending it out into space? Like maybe it's helping somebody.
It's helping.
Maybe it's part of an entire micro system that lives in space that thrives on the frozen Asgardian water.
like the ego plankton of a planet that just absorbs the water.
Exactly.
Opens like a Pac-Man his mouth to just grab the water.
Just drinking water. Okay. Well, I digress.
But this is, we do reveal the Chitauri here on their chariots. They will be flying around very shortly. Before they do, well, let's talk a little bit about blue beams and blue beam tropes. How does this, as kind of a trope, especially that really kind of around this time was quite prevalent in films? Does it? Do you have any issues with this? Does it work okay as a trope?
Issues with the blue beam trope. And I guess my issue is it just feels like it's once it's become a trope, it's like, oh, okay, of course it's a blue beam. I don't necessarily have a problem with the blue beam here in isolation. It's that there are so many of these pillars of lights that we see in movie, and it's everywhere, movies and TV and books and comics. Like, beams of light are important. And I wonder what it is that really connected with the cultural gestalt of creators of science fiction and fantasy, where they landed on this pillar of light concept as the thing that is going to represent so much transformation at the level of celestial happening.
I think on this side, to make the argument for the Avengers, I think here, because isn't it based on the Tesseract, so the Space Stone to open up the portal, it actually makes kind of sense. And I feel like in a lot of other movies, it's just like the space portal to create conflict. And here, I guess that is a bit more established, that it makes sense that this is what it's used for. That's its purpose. So I don't mind it as much, but as a trope, it feels really cheap in a way to like have conflict introduced really quickly as like a third act climax. And I guess it's just like not really that original to bring in conflict. But at the end of the day, I think we just want to see the heroes fight towards the end of the movie. So that's why like most of the Avengers films kind of lead into that direction with a big army that, the Avengers have to fight. Yeah. Essentially.
Yeah.
I guess there is the element of this blue beam. I mean, we saw it at the beginning of the film. It was just horizontal because of the positioning of the machine, but it really was designed to blast a beam to a certain point and open up a portal. Here we just happen to have it vertical now instead of horizontal. I suppose it didn't really matter what direction. I mean, to a certain extent, I suppose it would have made more sense to be horizontal, even though it is on the top of the building, because when these Chitauri come flying through, ostensibly I know it's space, but let's just say they're horizontal in space, and they fly through a hole, and suddenly they're now flying straight down toward the planet. And I suppose there's an element of confusion when you come through a hole and you think you're going one way, but you're like, oh, I'm actually falling.
Are they getting pulled in from gravity, or like, how's that? When is the gravitational force coming in?
There's like a weird shimmer as they kind of first go through the window. And I think that when they cut through that shimmer, suddenly they probably make that shift of going from we're flying through space and there's no gravity to suddenly, oh crap, now we're just, maybe we should turn these engines off and, try, angle ourselves so we're not just plummeting straight to Earth.
So that's what you're saying, that the hole should have come somewhere over London and then they just fly over it and across so that they're coming in parallel to New York City.
No, it's not, but it's not even that high. See, it's like, it doesn't have to be London. I mean, I think if they pointed it horizontally based on the runway that we saw earlier, I mean, I know that was probably only a couple 100 feet, but here, it certainly doesn't even seem like a mile. It seems like maybe it's a half mile at most that this thing reaches.
Well, this is my question though, because what is it hitting? Right? What is the target of the pillar of light blue beam? Is it hitting the atmosphere? Is it something that Selvig is controlling, saying, I just want it to go and then stop and do its energy work at a height that is predetermined by me, the physicist?
I'm not even sure he predetermines it. I think it's just something having to do with the Tesseract, the Iridium, the machine. Just like we saw earlier in the film, it went down to the end of the runway. And here, it's probably just something they said, it's going to go up a ways, but it doesn't have to go super high. Like it just, I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's any. It feels very arbitrary.
You're referring to the runway, the very beginning of the movie, right? Where they
correct
thing. But I thought in the runway there was a platform with some other mechanism, like the mechanism caught the beam.
No, remember, it feels weirdly like, why is there a runway here?
Yes.
Yeah, there's an arbitrary runway here. Oh, it happens to be because that's how far this beam shoots, and that's where it's going to open up this door and Loki's going to come through.
Yeah.
That felt very arbitrary, just like this feels very arbitrary. It's going to shoot up a little bit into the air, but then it's just going to open up a portal. It could have been 5 feet, honestly. Like, there's no logical reason why it opens up where it does, other than we need some space between it and the tops of the buildings, so there's fighting room for the Chitauri and Tony.
Yes, I think you have just defined the height of plot.
Yes.
Which is fine.
It makes it harder to defend, right? Because it's higher up.
Yeah.
Not as many things that can get up there. Not even the Hulk can jump that high to punch them, to close it out. I don't know what he would do. So makes it a bit easier to enter.
Yeah, I mean, he could have just pointed it at the top of the Chrysler building, right? And have all the Chitauri jumping out of the Chrysler building, but then they could have stopped it, ideally, potentially.
Or have some big reflector at the Chrysler building and then shoot it to bring it back to London, maybe. Have a connection, so it's like...
Yeah, it's all London is hosed either way, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, no, it has to be in London. But I also think the beam is just straight shooting up towards the, civilization where the Chitauri live. Because later on, when we get the moment with Tony blasting through, then he shoots it straight up and it goes straight to the civilization. So I feel like it's probably just like a straight line up to there.
Yeah.
But again, it's like they're not even at their... quote, home, whatever the Chitauri home is. Like, they're just out in the middle of space waiting for this call from the beam. They're just sitting there like, okay, eventually we're going to have a hole that opens in front of us and we're just going to go through it. It's so strange.
Do you imagine them just sitting there like looking around like, where's the hole going to come from?
Right. Like what
I
if
kind of imagine how would they know from where they are sitting in the blackness of space where the hole will be?
Right. It could have been behind them.
Yeah.
Or under them, or over them, or in the middle of them.
It could have been in the middle of them. Oh, Andy. Grueling line of inquiry. Can we talk about the shot that it cuts back to Iron Man?
The HUD?
The HUD.
Let's talk about that.
This is my favorite part. Because it turns out Jarvis in Iron Man's face is like Nissan starting up. All the new cars have the HUDs. When you change them into race mode, everything goes red. And this was it. And I actually did some looking on what was going on in 2012 in terms of instrument gauge clusters. And nobody had really enthusiastically adopted digital gauge clusters yet. They had adopted screens between gauge clusters or gauges, but they still had a traditional tach, traditional speedo, like all those things were still mechanized with a screen in between. And the screen, the degree to which the screen was curved and integrated into the gauge cluster itself was the degree to which you paid more for the car. But it was not long after that there was an aftermarket company that started releasing replacement gauge clusters, which seems like an incredibly terrifying thing to do to a car from a safety perspective to me. I can't imagine ripping out the gauge cluster and replacing it with an all-digital gauge cluster and computer system, but it was very, very cool. And after that, many automobile manufacturers started replacing entire instrument panels with the actual, needle refined but graphic interface, which is what Tony's HUD feels like to me. He switches to combat mode. Everything goes from blue to red. Gauge clusters. That's all I have to say about that.
It's definitely a look that is noticed as he's looking at it, because everything does have, as you just said, a very blue peacetime look, I guess we'll just call it, then shifting everything. And it's interesting how it's almost like a big swipe, almost like Jarvis just puts a spin on the whole HUD, everything shifts over, and it all becomes red,
Stark clean energy interface to Stark Sparkle battle mode interface. That's what I'm imagining.
I like also in this that you actually, if the trick with these views of the HUD is everything's reversed, so it's harder to read, but you can see guided micro projectiles with a little map of all the missiles that he has in his shoulder showing up on there, which is kind of cool. So he's already getting those ready as he gears up to go take on the Chitauri as they start coming through this rip in the sky.
Yeah, I think it actually says like 24, so it's probably like 24 missiles that he ends up launching.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
When it opens in his shoulder, it looks like 29. So sometimes I do wonder, like when it comes between different departments doing these kind of the work on the CG with these things, if there is communication errors as far as like how many are on here, what do we say, versus like the department that's actually later actually doing the suit, and they're like, well, we have room for a little more, should we put more in here? Yeah, sure. Like, I wonder if there's constant communication between them. And then you have to wonder, like, some of the conversations as it relates to this sort of thing is probably boils down to, is the audience really going to notice? Do we need to worry about this? Because it's going to happen so quick. And, they weren't thinking about movies by minutes, analyzing inscrutably every moment of detail. But it does make me wonder, eventually it hits a cost perspective where it's like, is it worth going in and changing that? Nah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something I noticed in sequence as well, not the amount of thing, didn't count the missiles as it was playing, but just the focus depth there is like so shallow, but it's still kind of, it's like rounded in a sense. So it's oddly in focus for like all of those missiles. And then the rest of it is really out of focus. And I feel like to me, it just looks a bit off. So that small little moment always kind of stood out to me when it opens, and it's a showcase of like those little tiny missiles launching. And it looks like little, it looks almost like it's alive. The way that they pop out, and then I don't know. To me, it was always something really just like tiny little Tony Starks that go out and boom, explode.
Tiny little. That would be awesome if he made each of those look like a little tiny Iron Man flying out.
I mean,
I wouldn't put it past him.
I think down the line he should just replace his eyes with like digital versions. So, because his screen is so close to his face, why not have like the whole eye be taken over by one of his nanobots, and it just like goes in and does that as well, and he just becomes fully android at one point,
integrated.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I would love to imagine the world where Tony's gotten to a point where he's like, I'm just going to put these nanobots in my eyes so I can always be on.
Yes. They extend from his eyes out.
Oh my gosh.
It is the next step, right? Because we've got Jarvis in his glasses already.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And he's always wearing the suit. It's all integrated into his, whatever he's wearing now. So
yeah.
And he will kill it on TikTok. Because, there was filters where you can change your eye color are really in. And he could just do that with anything. He could make it purple. And I think it would be really popular with the young audiences, the young people in the MCU world.
Oh,
that's so funny.
This movie would be so different if it had been made after TikTok, right?
Yeah, I mean, we get MySpace in the first Iron Man movie that he's talking about. So.
Right.
Oh my gosh, so funny.
They learned the lesson to not include anything anymore, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Until Fortnite.
Right, exactly.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask a serious question of both of you as we're getting started. Well, we'll see. As we're getting started with this actual Battle of New York, as it is dubbed in the films, what do you two think? This is, by the time this movie is coming out, it's 2012, May 2012. It is over a decade from September 11th in New York. How does it play using New York City as the backdrop for a massive post 9/11 attack? Is there is that something that ever crossed your mind as like, why didn't they pick a different city or anything like that? Or the scope of it, could they have changed it in some way so it didn't feel like an attack on a giant building? Is that something that came up at all in your thinking with this film?
I'm actually interested, Ewan, in your perspective on this as somebody who does not live close to New York.
I was also 3 years old when it happened, so
also
really...
because you were 3 years old.
Yeah.
So yes.
I think it's something that I associate a bit more when I think about Spider-Man, because that initial Spider-Man film from Sam Raimi did have the towers in there still, right? Till they did the reshoots. And here, I think the city has kind of, at least in the movie sense, kind of grown past that being really relevant. But the resilience of the people of New York is still kind of a motif that is referred back to. But I feel like it's also way more in Spider-Man than it is with like the Avengers. But I didn't really think about it, to be honest. As this was happening.
Yeah, okay.
I'll give you the 3-year-old
pass
sense memory
okay.
pass. Yeah, I know I thought about it, and because it's hard not to think about it, and I think for those of us who were older than 3 and sort of bore witness to it in real time. It's not something that just falls away when you see the skyline of the city and the impact that it has had on so many decades of our lives, of growing up with the city looking like this and now knowing how it turned into something different. And all I could think about was, can you imagine picking another city? Let's just say London. You want to keep it in the United States. Okay. Yeah, London. But so interestingly, London is another city you could have done something like this to, because London is a city that has a legacy of resilience to it, right? Like, there are other cities in the world that you could have done that to, but I don't think you could have done it in any other city in the United States and not have because there's the whole New York strong vibe. Like, this is, in many respects, the blockbuster answer to 9/11, right? Like, here we are a decade later. Look what we can do now because these are the avenging angels of our better nature, right? We can stand up to these kinds of things. So there is something of a sentiment, of a vibe to that. Like, can you imagine, like, oh my God, the Chitauri are over Boise, Idaho. What are we going to do?
Well, I mean, if anything, it would be something like L.A., which certainly would make more sense for Tony, because that's where, in the films at least, he is based. Yeah. But there is this, I don't know, I agree with Ewan that New York strong vibe seems much more prevalent to the Spider-Man films than this film at all. Like, this film doesn't bring it up once, like you see in the Spider-Man films. This film is just people in New York fleeing from the attacks and stuff like that. And it's not that same vibe that you get. So I don't think I read it that kind of that New York strong. So to that end, I think it could have been any other city, and I don't think it would have really made too much of a difference. But to your point, you probably wouldn't pick something like Boise. It would be like L.A.
Yeah, L.A. has been destroyed so many times. It's like, okay, it's like not even a joke anymore. It's not even funny. L.A.'s been burned and rebuilt in movies so many times. But it's interesting because Denver maybe needs to burn a little bit.
Well, but it's interesting because Feige actually said it was, quote, very important that it was New York City.
Yeah.
And so it makes me think that he was going for that very specific emotional connection for people.
Right,
it's just interesting that it's not in the film at all.
But look at where it is. Like, you may not feel that vibe directly as I do in this film, but the rest of the movies after this, like, have the exact same kind of Battle of New York, we survived vibe that we saw for the decade after 9/11 and still see, right? Like, this essentially is the MCU 9/11 that the rest of the movies get to process in terms of grief later.
Well, and yeah, maybe that's what he was playing with, but that to a certain extent, I mean, I feel like there's something that's a little tacky with kind of using it that way, and I just wonder if there was... I don't know. I guess in the scope of Alien Invasions, is there a better way to do it? I don't really know, but yeah, it's just one of those things. I think some people probably feel it more than others, and but I do think that there is an element there that I don't know. I just imagine that people in New York who very specifically were there, lived through it, I do always wonder with films like this if it's something that they just don't even want to watch because it's depicting something that feels so using kind of all that pain and grief in a way that's just for popcorn.
Well, it's just for popcorn, but I mean, again, I don't actually have a problem with the grieving parts of future MCU movies. Like, I think some of those are actually done really well. And when you talk about, particularly, the recovery of the snap later, like that's a part that I think the MCU does notably well. So I'm kind of okay with it planting the seed here by keeping it in New York. Even though I think the Battle of Boise has better alliteration. Battle of Tacoma, no, that doesn't really fly. Battle of... I don't know.
The Battle of Baton Rouge.
Battle of Baton Rouge, that would have been cool.
See, then you could have thrown Gambit into the movie, too.
That's right. Okay. Enough of your serious questions.
All right. So, what do you two think of the Chitauri? The way that their chariots operate. So, the way that they work. There's the pilot who doesn't use their hands. It's in the way that it's actually described is that they're like fused into it, which is an odd way to describe it. But basically, they're standing there and they've got like those shoulder holsters or like shoulder, I don't know, slings that are sitting on top of their shoulders, and then they steer it, I guess, just by moving. And then there are two gunners on the back, and each of the gunners actually has a forearm gun in which their arm is inside. I mean, what do you think? Do you like the way that these chariots look and operate?
Man, motion controls were really popular at the end of the 2000s. Even for in the Chitauri world, the Wii was really big.
The Wii was huge.
Yeah, it's essentially a glorified flying Wii Fit where you get to stand on it. But I like the design.
That's what they've been doing while they've been waiting.
Yeah,
The whole time.
it's just like you get a deleted scene where they just play tennis and it just flops back at where the portal is supposed to show up. But I like
just
how
love the
they're
idea of like cutting to like a Chitauri gun sticking into a TV. Like they just let go of it.
Yeah, they do the
because they
duck
didn't
hunt
have
thing.
the sling on their
They play
wrist,
duck
right?
hunt.
Yeah, yeah. I like the Chitauri design, I guess, but my problems with it, with the Chitauri in general, is that the sort of Geigerification of their whole get up is, it might be just a little bit too alien for me, and at the same time, there are so many, and they come through so fast that they just feel almost like they're from a different movie. Right, that portal opens up from a different film, and brings in these creatures that just feel to me like they're just not. They're not in this movie. And the battle is great, but they're disposable. Like but they're here for Hulk to smash and for Hawkeye to shoot unlimited arrows, and it's fine. I mean, they're fine, but they're not my favorite alien creature for sure.
You're much nicer to them than I am. I really think the look is just so hard to figure out, like, what am I looking at? I can tell that it's a humanoid shape, but, like, I can never tell, do they actually have a face? Is it a helmet they're wearing? Like, it's so just kind of indecipherable when I look at them. I just can't get a good read on it. And, they've kind of got armor and just their weapons and stuff. And it's like, are they robots? Like, this is one thing I just really struggle with. Like, the Chitauri seem like something that they just came up with because they just needed a big army. Mm-hmm. Like, that's really all they are. And they very specifically, deliberately chose to not do something that was in the comics. In fact, we've already talked about how the Chitauri, it's name only. Like, the Chitauri in the Ultimates were shapeshifters that, ended up financing the Nazi regime when they were trying to conquer Earth. Like, it's this whole thing that doesn't relate at all. They took the name and made it this totally different thing, and I am just not a fan. It's just so it's just a bunch of like pixel army is what we basically have here.
And it's a pixel army. That's what it is.
And I just don't. I think they could have done something a little more interesting. But
they really are, Andy. They are the answer to the question in the production meeting to, okay, we need something for our Avengers to fight, right? Like they are the intentionless kind of like, we need an army. And it's the simplest low-hanging fruit answer.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, but, we get one roaring. We do get that. We get to hear one of them
There's a
roaring
roar
here, so we do know.
Yes.
Yeah,
we got a roar. That's a whole class of Chitauri.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like The Last of Us. Some of them click, maybe even.
Yeah. Oh, now I want some of these that click.
Oh God! So man, I will say though, like as this minute ends, we get a shot that defines why the portal, the blue beam, does what it does, because this is a really cool wide shot over New York City. I think it's awesome. I also absolutely love going back a little bit to, I think, second 56, 57. We have one of those awesome Return of the Jedi battle fights where I always say Return of the Jedi fights because it's when the Millennium Falcon's coming in and you have all the TIE fighters coming at the same time and that fractal coming right at the camera. That's what this feels like to me. You have some explosions, but it's all the trails of all the projectile weapons that are flying around into that cone down, looking down as Tony's flying up toward the Chitauri portal. I think that's an incredibly cool shot. I love that shot. So, while the Chitauri themselves are the anonymous army, it's kind of fine because I really celebrate them as a backdrop to let the battle play out against them, which is sort of okay. Like, you know what? That's fine. I like the hero moments that this gives us, and some of the design shots are poster worthy.
Yeah. And I suppose that's really kind of where we're left. Is like there are some fantastic shots through this. Like I also love the one where Iron Man is flying vertically, like straight up, but he's positioned in the frame horizontally, and you have New York, the cityscape behind him on its side as he's kind of flying. I'm like, there are really cool moments through all of this. And I guess that's where the strengths lie in a lot of this, especially as this battle is just getting started, is in the way that we're constructing these images that do feel very much like from the pages of a comic book.
Yes.
I do have a bit of a gripe with this moment, though, because the explosions are really orange. And it's not really how that would work in an exposure sense. And it's fine if it's like stylized to me, but the beam is done right, where it's like blue on the outside, but then really bright on the inside. And I just, we want to get the detail from the flame, but we also get the blue beam. You can't have all of it at the same time. So like, to me, it breaks the realm of physics a bit too much, where like, as soon as something gets too orange in an explosion, I notice, and it takes me out a bit. But I agree. It's just like a burst of energy just all across the screen. And I like the lateral movement of him, like shooting through the frame as well.
And what we're doing with this minute is really kind of setting up this entire invasion, which is kind of cool. You get, as you said, Pete, the very last frame of this minute, the beam is shooting up off the top of Stark Tower, off screen, off the top edge of the screen, and you just see all these little dots of the Chitauri's chariots as they're kind of descending now from the hole down out to start their invasion of New York City.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Good minute. Well, let's wrap it up for today. Ewan, thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Remind us again about your podcast and what you're up to with Lachlan over there.
And you know what you should do as you remind us about that? How the heck did you guys hook up?
Oh, well, that's a bit of a longer story. But I don't know if you got time for that in this minute. But we just studied film together, film production at the east coast of Australia at the Gold Coast. And he's from Perth. I'm from Zurich, Switzerland. And then in order to keep in touch, we always talked about movies, started this podcast late 2019 and just kind of went from there and never stopped. That's kind of how that came to be. And we're seeing each other for the first time since 2018, since 2019. Tomorrow actually for me right now. So this is a great moment for me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So much fun. So much fun.
That's awesome.
But yeah, you can find us on the podcatcher apps. You can find us on YouTube. Podcast is a video podcast now. And follow everything over there. We do heaps of content all around film and TV.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
Lots of fun. I had a fun time chatting with you about some of my favorite animated films a little while back.
Yes.
Yeah, good stuff. So check that out, everybody. The links will be in the show notes. Remember, if you're not seeing them there, then just check our website, marvelmovieminute.com, and you can get everything there. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Minute 104. So, Pete, thanks as always.
Tomorrow, Andy, what happened to the waitress?
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.